I've been wanting to make a video like this for a long time, but I finally will be able to do it. So let's rank my top 10 favorite Stephen King books. Welcome back to BG's Books. I'm Mr. BG, and today I'll be ranking my top 10 favorite Stephen King books. So I've actually been wanting to do this video for a long time, like the past 2 or 3 years or something. About as long as I've read at least 10 Stephen King books. And my main problem was that I was able to figure out like my first three, and then I got four, and then five, and then, 6 and 7 and so on. And I had 8, and then now I have 10. So I can officially rank my top 10 favorite Stephen King books, because I've seen these all over YouTube. Some of my favorite booktubers do either their top 10 favorite books of all time, which is a video I will also be working on, but I only have 6 so far, so I'm going to have to delay that for a while. But I've also seen like top 10, top 20, top 30, top 50 Stephen King books, and I haven't read 50 quite yet. I have 48 read so far, but I certainly have enough for 10. And I guess I could make another video later down the line of like an updated list for my top 10. But I think the 10 that I have won't change, at least in the near future, because I'm pretty happy with my list of 10 right here. But yeah, so this is just my top 10. And yeah, let's get right into this. So starting off with number 10, it's not actually a novel, but a story collection, which is the only story collection on this list, by the way. And it is, of course, Night Shift. Now, I love Night Shift. If you saw my review for it last September or October, I think, then you would know how much I love Night Shift. It has 20 stories in here, and about 17 or 18 of them are just pure great. There's a couple that were either like a little boring or ones that I just didn't even remember entirely. But these stories are really good. I'd say that my least favorite was it was the one I can't remember, which I can't remember the name to, which is pretty ironic. And then my favorite one was The Ledge, because The Ledge was just super interesting. But overall, there are just a lot of really good stories in this collection. So if you like short fiction and if you like Stephen King, then I would say Night Shift is definitely the way to go with this, because this is just pure bliss for me. All right, so coming in at number 9 is actually a newer Stephen King book, which is kind of weird because I've said that Stephen King's newer stuff is like okay to just kind of forgettable, but this book in particular is actually really good, and it is, of course, Billy Summers. So Billy Summers was Stephen King's 5th newest book by now, I think. It was released in 2021. It's either his 5th or his 6th newest book. And basically, Billy Summers is just about a hitman named Billy Summers who is trying to get out of the hitman life, but he's dragged back in for one last, hit or one last mission. But on the way, he saves a girl from dying, and then they become friends, and then the plot escalates from there. So one of my favorite things about Billy Summers is that not only is it like a crime book, which is obviously a genre that I like a lot, but Billy Summers is also just about like our two characters, Billy Summers and the girl he saves, which is Alice, and then kind of their exploits and their adventures and whatever. The first half may be kind of boring, but the second half is certainly where it gets going. I love all of it. But anyway, if you want like a newer Stephen King read that isn't like painfully boring or painfully mid or whatever you want to call it, I would say Billy Summers, because Billy Summers is about the best you can get in 2020's Stephen King so far. Coming in at number 8 is another newer Stephen King book, but it's a bit older than Billy Summers. It's about 12 years old now. And of course, I'm referring to Dr. Sleep. So Dr. Sleep is the sequel to The Shining. and it follows Danny Torrance as now like a 30 or 40-year-old man dealing with the same kind of problems his father did, like his alcoholism and his inability to keep a job long term and whatever. So it's not just a sequel to The Shining. It's also just a very interesting story on how past experiences can carry on into the future and into the present, which I find is very interesting. A lot of people are saying that Doctor Sleep is better than The Shining. I wouldn't quite go that far, but Doctor Sleep is certainly a book that stands on its own. I do recommend reading The Shining, of course, to understand this one. But if this is one of your first Stephen King books, like it was mine, it was my fifth Stephen King book ever, this is not a bad way to start. Because Doctor Sleep, even though it has a whole book before it, it stands on its own. And Danny Torrance, especially as an adult, is just a much better character than he was in The Shining. So, yeah, this is a number 8. Doctor Sleep is just really good. While we're on the topic of Danny Torrance, number 7 is The Shining, the first book in the Shining duology. And like I said, I didn't think Doctor Sleep was quite as good as The Shining, but it was still good. But anyway, The Shining is like one of Stephen King's most famous books of all time. I'm sure you know that. It became the Stanley Kubrick movie in the 80s, which was really popular. Very inaccurate, but very popular. I love both the book and the movie. But what I love about The Shining is that it's just 3 people, Jack Torrance, Wendy Torrance, and Danny Torrance, stuck in the Overlook Hotel for the entire winter, and Jack slowly starts to lose his mind, and Wendy and Danny kind of have to figure out, okay, what are we going to do about this? So the thing that I love about this is the same thing I loved about Doctor Sleep. Jack is struggling with like alcoholism. He hit Danny a couple years back when Danny was like 2, so he's trying to like keep his very negative past behind him. And we also get remnants of like how he's turning into his own father and whatever. It's like The Shining is just a very good study about what happens when a good man just is trying really hard to become good, but life just keeps bringing him down. So I think it's a very interesting look at claustrophobia and mental health and whatever. And so while this isn't my favorite Stephen King book ever, this is definitely in my top 10 at number 7 specifically, because it is just that good. And so at my number 6, we have arguably Stephen King's darkest book, although I might argue that that would be something different. But of course, number 6 is Pet Sematary. So the thing I love Pet Sematary is that it deals with death and everything. I'm not trying to imply that I like death or anything. It's just that Stephen King has said in interviews that you shouldn't shy away from telling your children about death, especially young ones, because death is a natural part of life. Death will claim us all in the end. So I just love how this book goes over the grief of like loss, grief, and death, and just everything, and it handles it so perfectly. And the main character of this book, Lewis Creed, he is just an oddball. He is very paranoid. He second guesses a lot of things. It's like, I've only read this book once, same as a lot of the other ones on this list. But I will definitely want to reread Pet Sematary very soon, because it is just so enjoyable. And it's actually it looks pretty thick, but if you're really into it like I was, it is not that long of a read at all. So I think that a lot of Stephen King fans will definitely get a kick out of this, and I just love how dark it is and disturbing, but not too dark and disturbing. It's just about the right amounts of dark and disturbing, which I love. Anyway, Pet Sematary is just a great book about death and loss and grief and all that stuff. And I think that if you are going through a grieving process, Pet Sematary may be a book that could be able to help you through your tough time. All right, we've reached the top 5. So the number 5 place spot goes to Salem's Lot. So I love Salem's Lot. I remember reading it for the first time back in February of 2023 to prepare for the new movie that was coming out in April. And then, of course, April came around and it didn't happen. And then, of course, last year they actually did release the new movie. So I read it again in preparation for the movie, just like the first time. And I loved it so much more the second time around. Basically, Salem's Lot is just about this town named Jerusalem's Lot, sometimes shortened to Salem's Lot. And it just gets overrun by vampires. So a group of people from the town are just like, what's going on? And they have to stop the vampires. The thing that really brings out Stephen King in this is something that'll be shown in his later books, like It or the Tommyknockers, or even like the Castle Rock books, like Needful Things. But the book isn't so much about the human characters and the vampire characters. It's more about the town as a whole, because there are entire chapters dedicated to just what the town is doing and then the people who interact within the town. So it's not just like a solo book, it's a whole like town book, and the town slowly starts to die over the course of the book. And it's really sad because you learn to really love the town. So in the end, when it's like a ghost town, you're like, well, that's actually pretty sad. So anyway, of course, yeah, Salem's Lot is my number 5 because I just love it so much. I wasn't that into vampires, and then now I like vampires a lot more because of Salem's Lot. So anyway, Salem's Lot is just a really fun book about what happens when something happens to a small town and how that small town deals with that tragedy. So my number 4 spot is something that I've never seen anyone put in number 4 before. Like, people either hate this book, have never read it, or just were a little too crazy when they read it. And of course, I'm talking about Rage, as represented here by the Bachman Books Omnibus, which is for early Richard Bachman novels by Stephen King, specifically the first 4. And of course, the first one in here is Rage. So the thing I love about Rage is that, it's about a school shooter, and that is a very serious subject. So I don't want to like bring up any like bad thoughts about that or anything, because that is a very terrible thing. But the thing about Rage that I like so much is not only is it about a thing that hardly exists in books, but it's not about the incident itself that people kind of created. That's why it's out of print, by the way, because people recreated the school shooting part of it. But the thing I love about Rage is that it's actually kind of like a Die Hard meets Breakfast Club type of thing, where there's just these hostages in the classroom, all face to face with the killer, and all they can do in these hours while they wait to be rescued is just talk about their lives. So that's where I really like this book. Goes over like how teenagers are kind of shunned by society, and people with mental illnesses are kind of shunned by society. And it's really kind of a cry out for society to do better. And also, Stephen King wrote this when he was like 17 or 18. He was like a senior in high school. So this is a very mature book for such a young writer. I certainly couldn't write something as mature as this when I was 17 or 18. But yeah, so I just love how Rage handles its themes of adolescence and angst and society shunning the minorities and whatever. So it's just a very powerful book. The school shooting is only one aspect of it, but it's actually just about how teenagers are shunned by society and how society should maybe do better to treat minorities with respect and get mentally ill people the help they need. So yeah, unfortunately you can't buy it anymore for the reasons I've already said. But if you are able to get a copy of it, such as this, I would say you should read Rage and look at the deeper message besides just the killing part of it, because the deeper message is just super resonant, much more today than even back in the 70s when it was released. But yeah, Rage is just the perfect book for struggling adolescents, such as myself when I was a teenager. So similar to my number 4 spot, my number 3 spot is a bit more controversial. I don't see a lot of people rank it this high. In fact, I see it ranked either like around the middle of Stephen King's list or towards the bottom. But my favorite Stephen King book is Christine. So I think the thing that draws me into Christine is just that the characters are so well written. I mean, that's just a given with Stephen King books. But I'm not even that much of a car guy. I couldn't tell you the difference between one car or another. But I just like Christine because it's just about an evil car that just does stuff because it just does. And I find that very interesting. Our main two characters are, of course, Dennis Gilder and Arnie Cunningham, the kid who buys the car. And then soon there's a girl named Lee Cabot who Arnie starts to date. And of course, the car, being a girl, kind of gets a little jealous of that. So it's kind of like a little love triangle of a horror book, which is mainly a trope for romance. Sorry, I started there. I just don't know what I was saying. But anyway, Christine is just a very interesting book because it's kind of the black sheep of stuff. Stephen King himself says that it's one of his lowest reviewed books or whatever, which I don't really understand why, because Christine is just a wild ride. So if you love cars, I think you would love Christine, or even From a Buick 8. If you love characters, Christine definitely has a lot of that. And if you just like horror or just machines running rampant, then Christine is definitely the book for you. But I love Christine, and it is my third place spot. All right, so my number 2 spot is a book that you guys probably guessed would be on here sooner or later, but it is, of course, my second favorite Stephen King book and my second favorite book in general, and it is, of course, Misery. So Misery, of course, is about a famous romance novelist, Paul Sheldon, who, during a bad snowstorm, crashes his car and is nearly dead, but he's rescued by a woman named Annie Wilkes, who was a former nurse, and she also happens to be his number 1 fan. And so when she finds out that he's ending her favorite book series ever, she's obviously not very happy about that. So, of course, the thing I love about Misery is the characters. I mean, of course. Because, like, in books like Salem's Lot, the main characters are, like, the entire town, so there's a lot of perspectives. But in Misery, there's only 2. There's only the perspectives of Paul Sheldon and Annie Wilkes. And so they're kind of like a weird little duo. Sometimes they like each other, sometimes they hate each other, depending on what scene it is, and they just go back and forth like that for the whole book. And also, similar to The Shining, it's just a very claustrophobic setting. Paul Sheldon is just trapped in a spare room that Annie Wilkes had in her house. And with his legs the way they are, he can't just like up and leave. So yeah, there are some very interesting interactions between them. Some very iconic scenes, such as the hobbling scene. I'm sure you've at least know what that is from the movie. The movie is also fantastic, by the way. But I mean, yeah, I just love Misery for like all those reasons I said. It's very claustrophobic. It's very like isolated. The characters are fantastic, and I just love the interactions between our two main characters, Paul Sheldon and Annie Wilkes. So really, if you want like the perfect psychological thriller, horror, trap story, Misery is the book for you. And another reason I love it is kind of the meaning behind it, because Stephen King wrote Misery as a way of like getting over his drug addiction. Because back like at the late 60s and to the late 80s, he was like addicted to cocaine or whatever. So he wrote Misery as kind of like a pseudo therapy session for his drug addiction. So I think it's very powerful for that reason as well. But anyway, Misery is just like the quintessential Stephen King book for if you want something that's short but also very good. But however, as I said, this is my second place spot because there is one book I love even more than Misery. And of course, now we get to the number 1 spot on my favorite Stephen King books. And this is also just my favorite book in general because I just love it so much. And it, of course, is Carrie. So Carrie is another one of those books similar to like Christine or Rage or whatever that I never see on like any top 10 lists. It'll maybe be in like the 40s or 30s or 20s or something, but it's never like in the top 10 from what I see, because everybody just likes a lot of his other books more. But like Carrie, it's special to me for a lot of reasons. First of all, back in 2020, I saw the TV movie for the very first time, and that was one of the very first horror movies I ever saw. So that's kind of what got me into horror in the first place. And then another reason, Carrie was the first Stephen King book I ever read, so that's another reason why it's my favorite Stephen King book. And then another reason I like it so much is that this was the book that started me back on my reading journey that I've been on since 2021. So without me reading Carrie, I probably wouldn't read like I do today. So that's another thing for Carrie. But I mean, yeah, Carrie is just like so great, man. The movies maybe hit or miss depending on which one it is that you like, of course. Depending on which one you watch, they may be hit or miss. But I love the book just because of how detailed the characters are. Of course, it's not like the most detailed characters in the world because this is Stephen King's first published book. So of course, there's not going to be like as much stuff as like say It or Needful Things or whatever. But Carrie is just a really solid story about what happens when bullying goes too far and what people with certain powers can do if pushed too far, such as the bullying thing. So that's another reason I love it. And then, of course, it turned 50 last year on April 5th, 2024. So I made a whole video about that. And then on my Instagram this year, I posted a 51st anniversary of Carrie. So there's that as well. But yeah, I mean, Carrie White is like my favorite book character, period. She's my favorite Stephen King character. And Carrie is just one of my favorite fictional characters ever. And so like this is one copy I have. I actually have 7. Here are the other ones right here. If you can see that, these are all copies of Carrie on top of this one. So of course I love Carrie so much. This is actually the only novel I've really reread multiple times. Because especially when I was younger, I didn't really like the idea of reading like full-length novels. And here I am having read Carrie all the way through 6 times now, and definitely many more in the future. So Carrie is certainly means a lot to me. It just really resonates with me for some reason, and I don't know why. I just love it so much. But at the end of the day, it was my first ever Stephen King book that I read, and so it just always stuck with me. So there are just many reasons of why it is in my number 1 spot. But I love Carrie, and I always will. And Carrie is forever my favorite book ever written. But anyway, guys, that is the end of the video. I hope you guys enjoyed my ranking of my top 10 favorite Stephen King books of all time. I'm sure you guys expected to see The Stand or It in here, and I'll explain why I didn't put them on here. The Stand is because I haven't read The Stand, so it's kind of hard to rank a book I've never read before. And then It, while I do enjoy It, there were just a lot more Stephen King books that I enjoyed so much more than It. But don't worry, It is certainly up there. But anyway, now I would like to pass this on to you. In the comments, please let me know what your favorite Stephen King books are, whether or not they're like a top 3, a top 5, a top 10, or even just all of them, or just like any and all of them that you've read or whatever. But anyway, yeah, I love making this video. It took such a long time in the making because I was just trying to figure out what my top 10 favorites were. I was up to 8, and then now I'm at 10. So of course, there you go. If you guys would like to see my top 10 favorite books of all time, like I kind of teased at the beginning of this video, please let me know. I have 6 currently, so I will try to think about the other 4 and get them placed properly so that, of course, you guys can see my top 10 favorite books of all time. But anyway, yeah, I just love Stephen King books so much. I love Stephen King as an author. His dedication to writing characters is just unmatched by any other author I've ever read. And now that I'm reading all of this stuff, there certainly are a lot of choices to choose from, but Stephen King will always be the king of characters for me. But anyway, so yeah, let me know how I did with this video. And of course, leave me your picks for your favorite Stephen King books. But anyway, that is the end of the video. I've been Mr. BG. This has been BG's Books. And I will see you guys in the next video.